It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to a conversation about putting the Humanities PhD to work between the author, Dr. Katina Rogers, and our host for this event, Dr. Teresa Mangum, director of the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies at the University of Iowa. I'm going to keep my introductions very brief in order to ensure maximum time for today's conversation. And we invite you to leave questions in the Zoom chat for the question and answer period. Dr. Teresa Mangum is one of our most gracious, brilliant, and dedicated humanities leaders in the United States today. In addition to directing the Obermann Center, she is a professor in the departments of Gender, Women's Studies, and Sexuality Studies, and English. She is the author of Married, Middlebrow, and Militant, Sarah Grand and the New Woman, and editor and author of many other books and articles. With Ann Balk of Brown University, she co-edits the book series Humanities and Public Life for the University of Iowa Press. She also directs Humanities for the Public Good, an initiative funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Dr. Katina Rogers is co-director of the Futures Initiative at the Graduate Center CUNY, a program dedicated to equity and innovation in higher education. As a mentor and an institutional leader, Dr. Rogers perfectly exemplifies all the values she advocates in her crucial new book, published this August by Duke University Press. She is also the Director of Programs and Administration for the online scholarly network Haystack, that's HASPAC, and co-directs the CUNY Humanities Alliance, a partnership between the Graduate Center and 4 CUNY community colleges, also supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Putting the Humanities PhD to work, thriving in and beyond the classroom, is life-changing for any humanities graduate student and institution-changing for any humanities department seriously rethinking the role of graduate education today. It's such a pleasure to be here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Teresa Mangum and Dr. Katina Rogers.
Thank you so much, Cathy. It's wonderful to have everyone here, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk with Katina Rogers about her amazing book. I want to start just quickly thanking our co-sponsors, the Futures Initiative at the CUNY Grad College, our own University of Iowa Graduate College and College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Duke University Press, our wonderful independent bookstore, Prairie Lights, Haystack, the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies, and our Mellon-funded Humanities for the Public Good. We've all worked together to create this event. We will be recording, and if you would prefer not to be seen in the recording, you can just mute your camera, turn your camera off, and there will be quite a few people, so it's likely you won't be visible in any case. We are putting everyone on mute just because we're expecting a big crowd and we know how hard it is to keep the noise down, but we welcome you to ask questions in chat. And after Katina and I've had a chance to talk for a bit, we'll keep an eye on the chat and be happy to pull your questions in. So thank you again for being here. And Katina, I wonder if you would start us off. You are, whenever I talk to people about creating alternative career opportunities in humanities grad programs, they tend to be quite skeptical about, well, what jobs are out there? And you are sort of this marvel of a person who's had a series of amazing careers and mentors. So I wonder if you start us off just by talking a little bit about that series of careers.
Sure, I'd love to. I definitely want to start by saying thank you. Thank you, Teresa, for having me. Thank you to the Obermann Center, to Jennifer New and Ashley Tammy McNeil for your support in putting this together today. I really appreciate it. And I know there's so many names of other folks in the program who have helped to make this possible. I've been looking forward to it, and I only wish that I could be there in person. But when I think about my own pathway, I think so much about the support that I have had and that I have found along the way from so many different spaces, and that continues to be true now. And working with Cathy, working with Duke University Press and Ken Whittaker and everybody on that team, it has become more and more clear to me how collaborative really every aspect of what I do has been. And that was not something that I realized as a graduate student. I think it was not something that was really built into the graduate program that I was a part of. And it's been really revelatory to see the ways that scholarly generosity and professional generosity can build on one another and expand. Anyway, you can tell that I'm a little bit nervous to be talking about this, because it is, you know, there's so many things that are idiosyncratic about a career pathway. And for me, I went into my graduate program not sure what I would do when I finished. I ended up moving to New York City while I was writing my dissertation for personal reasons, and then looking for jobs while I was here. And that seemed to be something that happened by chance, but as I look back, I realized that all of these constraints around geography, you know, material needs of the work that you have, all of these things are an important part of shaping the pathway that you're on. So for me, I ended up working at the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, first just as a temp while I was finishing my dissertation, and then working there full time. And while I was there, it was this amazing opportunity for me to see the other side of grant making. What happens when the grant proposals are received and read, what kinds of programs the foundation was trying to shape. And even broader than that, it helped me to really understand all of the architecture that surrounds and supports higher education and research and teaching more broadly. That not all of that work is happening within the university, that in fact, there's quite a lot that we rely on outside. I mean, even just hearing how many of our programs have been funded by the Mellon Foundation is, it's really important to think about what's happening in these funding spaces. So that got me started on a path of thinking about the systems and structures of higher education and the things that support the work that's being done in classrooms and in research spaces. I had an opportunity to work with the University of Virginia in the Scholars Lab when it was based there, when the Scholarly Communication Institute was based there. I worked with Bethany Nowicki and her team to think about how scholarly publishing was changing and how graduate education might need to rethink some things given the ways that people were communicating their research with broader publics. I've had a chance to work in scholarly societies like the Modern Language Association, and now I've been at the Graduate Center for the last 6 years, going on 7 now, and have had a chance to work with doctoral students and undergraduate students and faculty members, and it's been really amazing now to be working back within the university, but in you know, kind of an interstitial space, not within a particular disciplinary program, but really thinking about what are the things that we want to fight for within higher education. What are the parts of the system that are worth, you know, putting ourselves out there for? What are the parts that we want to change and push against? And so how can we work both within those frameworks and against them at the same time to try and build what we've come to call the university that's worth fighting for? So it's been through that process that I also came to write this book, and I'm really grateful to have had an opportunity to think about my own career path as an example of a case study of how these pathways can unfold. And what it can look like to gain different and unexpected skills along the way. I never expected to be here. I didn't know that positions like this existed when I was a graduate student. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to talk about in the book.
And I really appreciate you. You've already introduced a number of themes that I hope we can come back to. One is the issue of skills and how we think about skills in the humanities that you talk about so thoughtfully. But before we go there, you and I had talked earlier about, so what are the obstacles? Many departments think, you know, would like to be more creative in thinking about creating graduate degrees that do open the door to more careers. But you really land on some of the things that get in the way. And I think you were going to read a passage for us to just ground us in the book itself as to get us thinking about some of those obstacles and what we could do about them.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, this is a passage from the 3rd chapter, which is called Expanding the Definitions of Scholarly Success. One of the things that I think is a significant obstacle is this underlying framework of prestige and how prestige is understood and measured, and all of the ways that that becomes manifest in the doctoral education process and in the academy more broadly. So this is on starting on page 69. For higher education to regain public trust, it must take seriously the mission of serving the public good. This includes a critical examination of the formation of a program's student body through the admissions process, its commitment to faculty, the kinds of scholarship it supports, the climate it creates, and the careers that it enables among its alumni. One significant through line that spans these elements is the need to shift the ways that institutions and individuals assign value to scholarly work. Prestige is the coin of the realm in most academic contexts. Is it possible to collectively nudge this standard toward valuing contributions that serve the public good? Since programs naturally compete with one another, shifting the value system to one that emphasizes connection to the community and society can have real effects across the broader landscape of higher education. Working seriously toward inclusion and support of faculty members who identify with historically marginalized groups and embracing greater fluidity in the form that scholarship takes are two key factors for improving the health of the humanities, because the way we evaluate success is a major factor that prevents progress in these areas. A broader understanding of what constitutes meaningful research or a successful postgraduate pathway may help to slowly change the norms that make it so difficult to advance. By establishing new measures of success, measures that take into account something other than biased student evaluations or imperfect tenure review processes or lengthy peer review and publication standards, the humanities open up the possibility of fostering new kinds of scholarship from a wider range of minds. Opportunities afforded by digital media can be an important part of this effort, since research shared as creative digital work reaches new possible audiences. People who might not have access to scholarly journals or who might not be inclined to pick up a monograph on a particular topic might nonetheless spend some time browsing a well-designed interactive website that introduces similar insights. Although complex digital formats do raise questions of longevity and archiving, advantages include the possibility of making work accessible in new ways, as well as creating a different position for the reader, one of active engagement and agency rather than a relatively passive process of consumption. However, work that makes use of innovative formats doesn't always count towards a scholar's professional advancement and is often done on the margins of more traditional work that is considered safer. It's already clear that innovative applications of research can be important to the public and valuable to scholars. The next step is to adjust professional reward systems so that projects with significant public impact also garner clear professional merit. Faculty and administrators can also work backward from creative research projects as a way to consider and even reformulate the kinds of trainings that their graduate programs offer. Most creative projects are not the work of only one person, but incorporate the expertise of many. With that in mind, programs might encourage more interdisciplinary work as well as increased collaboration. Or research methods courses might be paired with a professional development opportunity to learn skills that will allow graduate students to create the best kind of project to suit their research. Such collaborations and partnerships can enrich the quality, nuance, and impact of a particular project, thanks to each collaborator's expertise and perspective, helping the entire project to cohere in a powerful way. If a program wants to encourage students to take on collaborative, public-oriented work, it also needs to ascribe meaningful credit to that type of research. To begin moving in that direction, there needs to be a conscious decision to start valuing collaborative, interdisciplinary work from students in the earliest stages of the program. This is equally true in hiring, tenure, and promotion practices. A scholar hired to do innovative work must have the freedom to determine the form that work will take, and must have the commitment of their program and their university that even when such work challenges the norms, the scholar must be supported in navigating these processes and in finding ways to ensure that their work is not undermined by rigid limitations. Otherwise, there's a strong disincentive to do anything outside the norm. The difficulty in changing the metrics of what constitutes successful research and postgraduate pathways has to do with prestige, and it is related to the goal of establishing a more diverse and inclusive academic environment. It's complementary to that of broadening career horizons beyond the academy. As long as merit and prestige are measured through the lens of an unquestioned canon and long-standing forms of research and publication, the academy is unlikely to see pronounced normative changes in the way that the humanities are taught and studied, nor in who chooses to pursue such fields of study. If graduate programs genuinely care about inclusion and the new knowledge that it will bring about, graduate education reform must not only focus on broad career options, but also, and more importantly, on true anti-racist and inclusive practices within the university.
Thank you, Katina. And, you know, I have to say that what the passage you just read and the book itself seemed to me all the more important in the COVID moment, which was, it happened after your book came out, of course, or they weren't simultaneous. And I was in a conversation just yesterday with a group of administrators, and we were talking about how to support junior faculty through this period. And we ended up, to my surprise, with a discussion about the bar. And I wanted to grab your book and hand it to everyone in the conversation, because there was this curious way in which, you know, we were saying, yes, we need to make accommodations. We need to think about impact. We need to think about the fact that so many people have saved our universities by turning attention to new ways of teaching. And yet, when people contemplated evaluation processes, they were terrified of some imaginary prestige bar of exactly the kind that you're talking about. And part of what I love about the book is the way you really ask us to think differently about impact. And I'm going to kind of leap to a linked point that you just brought up, because I think so many people will want to think about this. And that is, you really surprised me in the book when you brought up the issue of equity, that creating graduate programs that prepare students for more careers than only being professors is an equity issue. And you've raised this fascinating tacit knowledge question. And as so many of us are trying not only to think about careers, but also welcoming a much more diverse group of students and faculty into our programs, what did you learn about how changing graduate programs might also change, and the prestige system might also change who would want to be in the humanities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, this is something that was really important to me in writing the book, is finding ways to talk about career reform that is deeply connected with other matters of education reform. And equity is one of these issues, access, labor structures. Hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit later in the conversation. But the question of equity is something that I have been thinking really deeply about, and have especially been influenced by Patricia Matthew, her book Written Unwritten, which brings together voices of many scholars, mostly women of color, who talk about what their experiences have been in the academy. In many cases, experiences of challenging tenure cases, tenure denials, or other obstacles that seemed arbitrary and biased in their implementation. And I have been thinking a lot about the ways in which the academy, gosh, I mean, I think about Sarah Ahmed's work in this also, but the academy says on one hand that we want diversity, we want equity, and looks to recruit people, scholars of color, students of color, faculty of color, people from underrepresented groups, to bring people in the door, and then does absolutely nothing to support them once they're there. And the rates of tenure denials for faculty of color, especially women of color, are so much higher than they are for white faculty members, especially white men. It's, you know, it becomes hard for someone to look at those numbers and say, yes, this is where I want to spend my time and energy, working against this brick wall that, you know, that throws up unexpected hurdles at every possible turn. So that is, you know, that's one challenge within the academy. But I think the other thing that I've become really aware of, especially working at CUNY, is how many deep and embodied and grounded commitments students have to various communities around and outside the academy. And sometimes it doesn't feel like there's space for a graduate student to apply what they're learning in a doctoral program and make use of that for something that's really policy relevant or community based. I think that, you know, if there is a greater celebration and acknowledgement and welcoming of the kinds of permeability that I think would be more generative, both within the academy and beyond, I think that you might see people who didn't previously see a place for themselves within the academy start to have more of a sense of how they might make a pathway for themselves there. There might be ways of better supporting people. I say this as a white woman who is an administrator, and so as when I walk into rooms where there's academic administration meetings going on, there's lots of people who look like me, and it's, I don't face many of those hurdles in terms of my race or ethnicity. But I did know that as a graduate student, I did not have a lot of experience with other family members or friends who had gone to graduate school. I didn't know really anything about graduate school until I was sort of in the door. And so thinking now as an administrator and as someone who works closely with doctoral students about all the questions I was afraid to ask, all the things that I didn't know, all the questions around budgets and grants and teaching structures and labor structures, there's just such an imbalance in how one might navigate a university space if you have access to that knowledge or don't have access to that knowledge. So I've really been thinking about what the role of that tacit knowledge is in maintaining the status quo within universities, and how we might pull the curtain back to reveal some of those inner workings in a way that might help people to understand how decisions are made and how they might have an influence in those decisions as well. And we try to do that with our graduate fellows in the program, and I hope it's been something that's been useful for them as we think about, state legislatures and what's happening with the CUNY budget, which we don't have, even though we're well into our fiscal year. Talking together about what that means and what it means for the kinds of programming we can plan and the kinds of initiatives we want to undertake. I think it gives a sense of why advocacy really matters in an urgent and immediate way, in addition to more of a long horizon way. I think that all of these questions of equity and of tacit knowledge are really deeply intertwined, and it's one thing that makes it hard to talk about career pathways on their own, but also I think puts even more importance on that conversation than it sometimes receives.
Well, and it really occurred to me when I was reading and thinking about the great research you've done also on all kinds of reports that really give us evidence-based arguments for some of your claims and recommendations. And one of the things I was thinking about is the way that we hear from so many graduate students through our Graduate Institute on Engagement in the Academy, where students show up and they say, I love my graduate work, and yet I also, as you just mentioned, I feel deeply connected to my community, and I'm not really sure that research is my primary focus. I might want to teach more intensively. I might want to take what I'm learning and move it out into working for a nonprofit or a library or whatever, and not feeling that faculty have the tacit knowledge they need to provide advice on those areas. And one of the things that occurred to me about that limitation, which might hit more civic-minded students even more directly than others, but with the COVID economic situation will be meaningful for all of us, is it really seemed to me that your recommendations about humanities departments forming stronger ties with business, with people out in the community, with mentors and alumni who did not end up in academia, or at least not as professors. And we need their tacit knowledge now in order to reimagine ourselves in a more full way. And the language that tends to group around is the language of skills, which many academics feel very tense about because they associate it with a certain kind of corporate world and neoliberalism. But you offer us a vision of that tacit knowledge of skills that is so much more comprehensive and driven by values that would be meaningful both in the university and outside. So I wonder, what in the book, what do you mean by skills, and how does it counter that anxiety?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think a lot about having a translational approach. So I think that sometimes when the conversation about skills becomes very sort of businessy in a way that that a lot of people in academia are not super comfortable with, it's often because there's a sense of narrowness around those skills, and a sense that it's an add-on to all of this really deep learning that people are doing along the way. So it's the kind of thing of someone feeling like they get to the end of their PhD program and suddenly they need to learn to code when that's never been a part of the work that they've been doing. And yes, that feels, it feels arbitrary, and I think honestly kind of insulting to students to feel like, you know, they've been socialized in one direction to think about a certain type of success and a certain type of pathway, and then suddenly at the very end of their trajectory, there's a really sharp turn. So what I have found is that a lot of the specific skills people learn on the job all the time. When people start a new job, you learn the specific programming language you need, you learn how to do research in a particular type of database or whatever it is. All of those things, it's rare that someone has exactly the skill set that a position is looking for. Instead, what's more important, and what I think doctoral students can do really well if they're helped a little bit in the framing of this, is to think about a translational approach to the kinds of things you already know how to do. So thinking about you know, the ways that research skills might be applied in a different context. Something that I found really interesting in some of the early research that led to this book was that when I did a survey of people who had PhDs or were ABD and who were working outside of the academy, and then a survey of their employers to find out how prepared people felt for the jobs that they were in, and what skills they felt their doctoral program specifically had prepared them for these jobs. And most of the people who had the humanities degrees, they did not say that research was something important that they brought to their job. But every single employer said that the research skills that the students or former students had was one of the things that set them apart. And for me, that was really, that really made something click in my thinking about how we as grad students and former graduate students understand our own strengths. I mean, I think that the atmosphere of graduate school is such that there's a baseline of very high functioning skills around research and writing and communication and teaching, and that becomes the baseline. And it's only things that go beyond that excellence that people think set them apart. But in any context outside of graduate education, those research skills are astonishing, and it might not lead to an article, but it might lead to a major decision that an organization wants to make, or it might lead to a new strategic initiative that they want to pursue. And so I think thinking about those things not as being really wedded to a specific output or type of content, but thinking about what it allows you to do and how it allows you to move in different spaces is really empowering, and it opens a lot of doors, whereas I think thinking about skills in a narrower way makes it seem like, oh, I'm not qualified to do this because I don't have 5 years experience in X, but there's ways of thinking about X that, you know, that actually do match with what you know.
Well, and one of the things you touch on briefly in the book, but that I see compounding this problem, is the way that we train ourselves and our students to talk about how and why they're an expert. And so most of us, and you know, you think about a typical job interview in a department, most of us, when we're asked, what do you do or what are your strengths, we immediately go to content. Mm-hmm. I am a Victorianist, I work on X, which is not necessarily something that will be of value in a workplace outside a department where you could teach Victorian literature. But your point about translational understanding of the value of our work always hits me. I just want to take students and say, yes, you know that, and it's wonderful, but you're also a brilliant writer. You synthesize amazing material. You project manage when you work with your whole, you know, the classes that you teach. And I just, I mean, maybe that takes us to the more concrete question of what could our departments be doing to prepare people for a range of careers. And I saw that several people right here in chat, you know, were just boom, already asking, but we can't do more. We're asking students to do more and more. And I don't think that's at all what you're recommending in your book. So how do you think we we really build these learning opportunities into the fabric of departments?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was so inspired hearing the showcase of students' summer internship projects with organizations in the area that you all put on yesterday. I think that that is a great example if people want, you know, a concrete programmatic model to look to. I think that's a great one. I think another question that I'm seeing in the chat is why, you know, sure, but like, should we actually get a PhD given all of this? Is this an affirmative reason to pursue a PhD? And I think that those two questions are connected, because I think that what's worth thinking about is, why do we do what we do? And what is the value of humanities education? And why do we need it in the world and not only in the classroom? And for me, that's the starting point of this conversation, is thinking about, I mean, it's so much more resonant than I was expecting it to be, given everything that's going on. It's actually, it's really hard to take in the extent to which right now in the COVID pandemic, we need people with humanities training in so many different spaces. We need people to understand not only the epidemiological consequences of what's happening or the ways that a vaccine can be developed, but understanding, you know, why is it that this is hitting Black and Latinx communities so much harder than white communities? Why is it that this is compounding with economic precarity, food insecurity, housing insecurity? It's so many pieces coming together at the same time, and those are humanities questions. You know, being able to understand what is the social context, what is the historical context, and where can we go from here? So looking at, you know, examples from the past when there have been moments of health crisis or social unrest, and where people have turned in those moments. For me, that is a very clear, like, desire. Is something that I really hope that people take away from the book, is that we need, this is not just about finding a safety net for people who are already within doctoral programs. It's about thinking about future generations of scholars, what they will bring to our society, and how we can make sure that the academy is a place that is supportive of them and that can help them to pursue those lines of research. I think that, you know, the thing that's hard is that this doesn't change in a single generation of students. There's been work that's been done on career reform for a long time, and I think that the norms are still not that different than they were in past decades. As far as, you know, I still hear students feel quite nervous to talk to their advisors about other possible career pathways and things like that. But I think that if we can find ways to let these questions of values and of the commitments of students drive the ways that the curriculum is shaped, drive the projects that are being created, the career part follows naturally on that. And I think that letting those lines of inquiry really blossom and finding ways to support it is one of the best things that we can do as administrators and faculty members within the academy to support students. It's risky for students to take on projects like that, and I think they need someone to have their back, to understand the administrative structures that they may be up against, and to help smooth the road so that they can do their best work.
Well, and you know, this is where we get into some of the hard questions for departments, but I think taking into account your economic analysis of the PhD and the issues you're raising now, I mean, I think it's time for us to ask questions like, can we design a PhD that doesn't take 8 years? Mm-hmm. Can we design a PhD that is funded differently? Can we divide, you know, if we really believe that the knowledge gained within a humanities PhD could be valuable in multiple settings, and you talk about this in the book, does everyone need to write the same kind of dissertation? Are there other mm-hmm. ways to holistically represent your accomplishment and the work of the degree? And I know you and Cathy are leading this very creative program at CUNY, at the Grads in the Futures Initiative. I know you must be wrestling with some of these questions too. What are you discovering in your program or in other places that suggest to you there really could be a kind of PhD that use the text, use the methods, the values of the humanities, but seriously to other ends.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I mean, I've learned so much of this from working with Cathy, but when students are given agency, the things that they come up with tend to be so rich and so much more creative than a faculty member might go in expecting. I mean, it's been astonishing to see what people are able to do when they are given some space and some autonomy and resources. And I think that's the other really important piece, is that we have a serious crisis in higher education right now around student debt and around adjunct labor. And I think that without addressing the material realities of students and faculty members, and really thinking about what it means to invest in students and to invest in our instructors, I mean, I don't think that we can create a sustainable and sustaining doctoral education system without attending to those needs, you know, until all of our students have health insurance, until people are able to treat this as a job. I think there's only so far we can go with creative curricula. But I do think that, you know, what we're seeing in the Futures Initiative is that when students have the space and, you know, enough scaffolding to give them some framework to move forward, but when they have the space to create some of their own programming, when they're given an opportunity to see, like I was saying before, behind the curtain and what happens in academic administration and how the structures work, I think that there's really some incredible possibilities there. There's many good examples examples at Iowa, examples at the Scholars Lab at the University of Virginia, all kinds of programs where there's collaborative work happening. There's work that's very project oriented that I think just shifts the balance of thinking about doctoral education from being one where you must meet a certain set of requirements to being one where you're in a space where there's this expansive possibility of exploring something new in ways that someone may not have done before. And that's really, it's unique and it's special, and it's important to retain that. And it's hard to do if people are worried if they're going to make rent. So I think all those things are really deeply connected as well.
And part of that, I mean, I think one of the parts of your book that challenged me and made me think, as did many parts of the book, okay, Teresa, you have some work to do on yourself, is the part where you talk about love. Mm-hmm. And where you talk about the way that and you know, as a Victorianist, George Eliot's notion of a vocation versus a job, you know, has driven a lot of my pleasure in my work. But you really talk about the way that we abuse the call, you know, the endorsement of people saying, I came to the PhD program because I love what I do, and then being willing to take jobs that are so exploitive because I love what I do. And I mean, I so appreciate that you're making the case that we have to be realistic about what we're offering people, and we have to listen to students and their desires. But part of good mentoring, I would guess you would say, but I'm asking, is how we really talk to students about the complexities of love for and the way that gets deployed in our departmental rhetoric.
Yeah, it's really insidious because it's a very, I think, seductive line of thinking. We so many of us do love what we do. You know, we came into this space, into this profession, into this range of professions because we see value in it. We care about it. We care about students. And I think that all of that is really important. And I don't want to dismiss that sense of commitment that people have. What concerns me is when that gets manipulated so that by diminishing the sense of material realities and the sense that academic work is work, it's not some disembodied life of the mind where you don't have to worry about paying for your groceries. I think that until we can recognize academic work as work and talk about things like salaries and benefits and labor structures, there's such a risk of people getting pulled along with this sense that you know, if you really love the students, you'll just keep going. And so many adjunct positions are so deeply exploitative. And I don't know. I mean, I just wonder about the power of collective refusal to, I know that, you know, it takes labor organizing to be able to have that power. Adjuncts as individuals are left very powerless in most cases, but what would it look like if there was a collective refusal to accept those working conditions? I mean, the union at CUNY has worked really hard to try and increase both the pay and also the structure of the contracts for adjuncts. It's still impossible to live as an adjunct in New York City, to live comfortably without, you know, side hustles. But I think that for me, the matter of collective organized action around labor is a really important way of demystifying the profession itself. And I think that, you know, it comes down so much to language too, and to a sense of Cartesian dualism that somehow puts this idea of the life of the mind above the needs of the body. And the more I've been involved in programs that really emphasize an embodied reality and that take joy in the parts of people's lives that they don't always bring into the classroom, and allows people to bring their fears and their vulnerabilities and their challenges that they're going through into academic spaces, it enriches the scholarship too, and it makes it a safer place for people to be working in many cases.
Well, and one other thing I thought in reading your book and in listening to our wonderful graduate interns, and we'll be posting the recording for those who might be interested in hearing about the work that this is a summer internship for now, at least, where graduate students in the humanities and related disciplines are out working with community partners during the summer. And part of what we hear from them over and over again is they have no idea that the kind of work they feel fulfilled by really is valued in those community partners work settings. Mm. So they're so startled, and you were touching on this earlier, they're so startled to find that their ability to synthesize material and convey ideas in a really accessible, well-reasoned way, and lively language, etc., that is such a high value in another setting, you know, like at a museum or with the community development group. And so we've also tied that sense of I love what I do to the fantasy that you can only do what you love in one place, instead of you can find job satisfaction doing much of what you enjoy doing in all kinds of arenas and be valued for that. Mm-hmm. I just really want faculty to know, and students both, to know that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there was something you mentioned earlier that I didn't go into, but I think this is one of the reasons that having a range of mentorship conversations is really important, not only having academic mentors, but also, you know, finding ways for students to be, and maybe it's not the departments that need to do this, but finding ways for students to be connected with others, whether it's with alumni who are working in other spaces or people who are in areas that interest them, you know, really finding time to work with others who are advanced in their careers, but in different arenas than only in the academy. I mean, I think it just really surfaces different kinds of conversations, different questions. There's even, you know, there's some extent to which you can do this in online spaces. This was one of the things that initially drew me to Twitter 10 years ago, was the ability to listen in on different conversations in different professional spaces and hear what were the things that were really animating people when they were working in different areas. I think that sense of, you know, we can apply, I'm coming from a literature background, so I can apply close reading skills in those social media contexts and hear what's being said, what's being not said. And that, for me, that was very interesting. And that was not something that I necessarily had easy access to otherwise. So I think considering every conversation to be valuable and thinking about what you're hearing and what you're not hearing in each of those contexts can be a really important way to start, you know, thinking about what the patterns are of where you might feel satisfied and where you might feel really deeply engaged.
And you talk about the networking and about listening in on those conversations in different ways in the book. and I think people in English and history departments often don't realize that even to make the kind of translation you're calling for, we imagine that because we're so adept rhetorically that we can anticipate what other people need and want from us. But the students who work out in these settings and come back and tell us about what they're hearing, in that workplace, how people talk to one another, what kinds of things they share, and how they articulate their needs, give the students so much more of a sense of control and choice than back to the tacit knowledge that, and of a fairly small world that we provide them with. So I think we as faculty have a lot to learn also in listening to conversations.
It was really liberating for me to realize that the academic job market is the one that's very strange.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that most other job markets function in very different ways. But yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, recognizing different kinds of knowledge is a really important part of this entire endeavor. So.
One of the things that you say in I know we're coming too close to the end of our hour, and there's so many things I want us to talk about, but I think you shocked me the most with your recommendation that so many departments are addressing the academic job market by seeing it as an ethical responsibility to shrink their programs almost to nothing, or to the point that it is incredibly difficult to even provide a curriculum, just a baseline curriculum, much less a creative curriculum. And we've all done that out of a sense that we should not be producing more PhDs when so many people are under or not employed. But by thinking about preparing students for different kind of careers, you suggest that there might actually be a much more hopeful approach. And I just wonder how could you justify to anybody that maybe shrinking departments is not the answer?
Yeah, and this is a question I want to handle with a great deal of care because it's really complicated. And I do think, so first I want to say, I think that if a graduate program cannot materially support and academically and socially support their students, then yes, they maybe should consider being smaller. I think that departments have an ethical responsibility to support their students in their doctoral studies. That includes material support. And so for me, that is the indicator along which programs can think about the optimal size. But for me, it has much more to do with support during the program than with what happens after. And the reason that I don't advise just unilaterally shrinking humanities programs across the board is because I think that will lead to even more conservatism and even more rigid sense of who can make it within this, narrower and narrower system. I think we'll see a decrease in diversity. I think we'll see a decrease in really creative thinking because people will be scared. If the more we narrow those boundaries, the more we're also narrowing our thinking. And so my hope, I think that we need to sort of untether our thinking from the admissions process on one hand for doctoral students and academic job placements on the other. Like those to me are not just two sides of the same coin, and they don't need to be and probably can't be in a one-to-one ratio. But instead, if we see humanities education as being something that has really deep intrinsic value in many spaces socially, then we can start to think differently about how we're recruiting students, what we're looking for, what's considered to be promising. I think even just thinking about what does it mean to look for students who we think are likely to succeed when our notion of what that success looks like is very particular. So for me, the question is not about reducing programs in order to have a one-to-one match with tenure track positions. For me, the question is making sure that a program can meaningfully support the students that are there and help them to achieve their goals and to support a broader range of those goals.
And, again, I just think if we could, if we, those of us who are faculty and administrators, if we could train ourselves to feel more confident about ways to design our courses to prepare people to do more than one thing, more than only write articles, for example, then that would change that ethical landscape. Although I completely agree with you that, I mean, I tell my students, unless you can be funded to a level that you can live without debt, you know, going into further debt, I just can't encourage people to, you know, to go to grad school now. We have several questions that I just want to check in because I know we're coming to the end of time. And so one of the questions is, a graduate student who says, I'm being pushed hard to do double preparation. And I wonder, how can we expand the career opportunities without doubling the, you know, you have to take this and do 4 certificate programs, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes back to the value structures again. Until we're saying, okay, your dissertation can look completely different from what has traditionally been accepted by this program, students are going to be caught in a bind where they're doing double work. In the book, I point to Amanda Visconti's work. She did a dissertation called Infinite Ulysses. And alongside her digital dissertation, she also did a really wonderful, what I think of as act of service in documenting all of the conversations that she had along the way, all of the people that she had to talk to in order to get this dissertation approved. And that act of documentation is a lot of double work. I think that while norms are in flux, it's often the case that people will be doing you know, more work to try and make that translation possible. But I think that the more, you know, those of us who are in positions to advocate for different models, the more that we can do that, the more we can listen to our students when they're saying, I would really like to be able to do X and I can't find a way to make it happen, and help support them in that process. It makes it easier for the next students who come down the road and want to do something similar. So it's hard, and I'm not going to try and say that it's not. And I have seen so many students who get caught in this situation of wanting to do things that really create such an interesting project, and then having to do other things that it feels like it's taking them away from it. And I hear you. I mean, that's what I think we as faculty and administrators need to be working to change.
And, you know, we're just about the end of time. And I hope people are reading the chat, because there are fabulous resources and suggestions there also. But it does seem to me like, as just first steps, really thinking with students and making clear to students that we're open at the process of application and through our mentoring to the students having very different career objectives than the jobs we hold. That seems like step one. I think, you know, just learning ourselves. We're good, you know, faculty and administrators are trained to be researchers too. Instead of saying we don't know about these other opportunities, we should start learning. That's our job. And, you know, part of the pleasure and the power of having the incredible privilege of tenure or any kind of secure job is to use that position in the service of others rather than as an obstacle. And so, you know, I just feel like your book gives people so many suggestions, important philosophical and ethical questions to ask ourselves. And I just wonder, are there any final thoughts you would want to leave us with before we close today?
I guess one other thing that I haven't really touched on that I would like to say is that I think that there has been a devaluation of teaching that is really deeply embedded in many of these questions. And sometimes when I'm talking about career pathways, there's a sense of concern that I think that people shouldn't be going into faculty positions. And I just want to say that I think that the first step in really valuing the many types of interventions that humanities scholars can make in the world is also to acknowledge and celebrate really good teaching. I think that we do not do enough of that. I think that that's part of the way that we have ended up with such underfunded instructional positions. I think it's connected to feminist questions of care work. And I think, you know, if you look at mentorship and service work, it tends to be even less valued in many tenure processes than teaching, which itself is subservient to research in many cases. And so I think that thinking about our own core enterprise and thinking about teaching and learning is absolutely essential to understanding what we as humanities scholars can contribute in other spaces as well. I am also I have not been able to track what's happening in the chat, and I am lamenting that right now because I can see that there's so many good thoughts and questions floating by. I'm wondering if it might be of interest for me to hold on to those chat questions and write a blog post Q&A that addresses some of them, because I'm sorry I haven't been able to hear too many others' voices.
That would be fantastic. I bet Ashley can make that magic happen. And your final point about about teaching, I mean, has never been more true, as I said earlier, than this moment in COVID, where all of us, graduate students, adjuncts, instructors, tenured faculty, everybody who I think has compassion has set aside much of our work to really take all of our talents and all of our heart as well as mind to the project of teaching in the time of COVID. And, you know, one of the real tests of some of the kinds of value shifts that we've talked about today is how will that be rewarded? How will that work, that commitment be rewarded when we've brought the best of ourselves, the best of our disciplines to our teaching? So we need to all be watching and asking that question regularly. Yeah. Katina, I'm so grateful to you for this incredible book and discussion. It's a pleasure to see so many friends' names sail by in chat. Thank you, Cathy, for the introduction and for working with us, Ashley and Laura for handling all the tech. And we look forward to continue conversations, and y'all need to buy this book. Thank you so much. Bye, Katina.
Thank you all so much. It was really a pleasure. Take care, everyone. Thanks.